Russia is an energy superpower and one of the overall largest economies in the world. But most of its economic strength comes from its oil and gas industry. In the last 20 years, the Russian oil and gas sector has been mired in a number of conflicts, and it's possible that gas and oil were the catalyst for the war in Ukraine. Now, Russia's oil and gas industry is being tested by global sanctions, and if it fails, Russia's economy would be dealt a heavy blow. How did we get here? And what's the story behind Russia's oil and natural gas industry? Russia's economy and why its industries matter. Prior to Russia's invasion, the country was exporting over 4.5 million barrels of oil per day, making it the second highest oil exporter in the world. Russia was also one of the world's highest exporters of natural gas, with 43 trillion cubic feet of natural gas exported in 2020. But this supply has dropped down to 8.9 trillion cubic feet exported in 2021. Many first world countries depend on Russian imports for large portions of their energy usage. Some countries, like Finland and Lithuania, have no domestic supply of natural gas, so they rely on Russia 100% for their supply. But these numbers don't even scratch the surface of what Russia holds in oil and natural gas. Despite these astronomical numbers, US geological surveyors estimate that Russia also has the largest undiscovered supply of natural gas in the world and the second largest supply of untapped oil. The oil and gas industry is absolutely vital to the Russian economy, since the combined sector comprises 60% of Russia's total exports and 40% of Russia's federal revenue. Before Russia invaded Ukraine, it was the sixth largest economy measured by the purchasing power parity and the 11th largest economy in nominal GDP. Purchasing power parity is calculated by dividing the cost of a good in one currency by the cost of the same good in a different currency. GDP measures the market value of consumer goods and services produced by a country in a given period of time. While these figures don't directly measure the wellness of the population, they do showcase how Russia holds an important role in the global marketplace. It's no secret that countries use their power and influence to exact change and to negotiate on the world stage. But Russia's reliance on their energy sector could become their undoing. Gazprom and the beginnings of conflict. Two of Russia's largest oil companies, Rosneft and Gazprom, are state-run or state-owned. Gazprom, in particular, has become one of Russia's greatest political weapons, and Russia's actions through Gazprom have directly influenced the current energy, food, and humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, which has had knock-on effects globally. In 2019, Gazprom had the highest revenue of any company in Russia, and it holds the #1 rank for natural gas companies in the country. Gazprom's unified gas supply system is the largest gas pipeline in the world. At 98,300 miles, the pipeline extends from Russia to Britain, Germany, and even down to Turkey and Italy. Gazprom is one of the main companies spearheading the Nord Stream pipeline, which runs from the city of Vyborg to Germany. Ukraine and the United States have been opposed to the pipeline because Russian oil and gas companies have imposed territorial restrictions that reduce competition in the energy market. A year after Crimea was forcibly annexed by Russia, the European Commission charged Gazprom with violating antitrust policies. As the executive cabinet of the EU, the European Commission claimed that Gazprom was squeezing countries and clients with unfair prices and restricting access to fuel in countries that had competing gas and oil industries. These business practices, spearheaded by the Russian government, impacted 8 countries, primarily Central European countries, that were formerly under Soviet control, like Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland. In 2018, Gazprom dodged a $12 billion fine by settling out of court to remove the contractual blocks it had put in place, which gave a temporary boost to European economies. Under this new agreement, Gazprom would be obligated to perform price reviews, although this win would only last a short time. That's because Gazprom and the Russian government's fierce competition with Ukraine eventually reached a historical tipping point. Ukraine and Russia clash over oil and gas. Within a decade of the Soviet Union's collapse in 1991, Ukraine had become the biggest doorway for Russian oil and gas exports. In the early 2000s, 80% of Russia's gas exports traveled to Europe through Ukraine. This volume accounts for 2/3 of the total revenue for Gazprom. Meanwhile, Ukraine was producing over 700 billion cubic feet of natural gas, and the country got most of its imports from Turkmenistan. Ukraine and Russia reached a deal where Ukraine would receive 600 billion cubic feet of gas from Russia in exchange for Russia's transport pipelines that ran through the country, and Ukraine would purchase only 280 billion additional cubic feet of gas to meet their consumption quota. During these years, Russia began accusing Ukraine of siphoning off an additional 200 billion cubic feet of gas. However, there is little publicly available information to determine the true cause of Russian gas loss during this period. Production errors and technical malfunctions could also account for the loss of gas through Russia's nearly 100,000-mile-long pipe system. To alleviate these concerns, Russia and Ukraine entered into a number of commercial negotiations that were mediated by intermediary companies like the Areti Group and Rosukrenojo, which are both based in Switzerland. It was later revealed that Rosukrenojo is 50% owned by Gazprom, and Western diplomatic wiretaps uncovered that the company was controlled by Semyon Mogilevich. Mogilevich was born in the Ukraine before he moved to Russia to become an organized crime boss. Mogilevich runs a family mafia-style organization and has been charged with murder, prostitution, weapons and drug trafficking, fraud, and pretty much every other crime imaginable. In 2008, the FBI considered him the most dangerous mobster in the world. Despite his notoriety, he lives freely in Moscow. To deflect from Russia's attempts to control the trade agreement with Ukraine through undercover plants, Putin started making claims that Rosukrenojo was ran by a business partner of Ukraine's third president, Viktor Yushchenko. Ukraine's security service, the SBU, was investigating these ties, but the investigation was mysteriously halted. In 2005, diplomatic and economic tensions between Ukraine and Russia truly ramped up when the largest oil and gas company in Ukraine, the state-owned Naftogaz, admitted that Ukraine had kept some of the natural gas that was intended for other countries. This led to Russia cutting off gas supplies to the Ukraine in 2006. Supply was restored, but a long dispute began about Ukraine's debts following the debacle. In 2008, Yushchenko and Putin agreed to settle Ukraine's $1.5 billion debt, and the two countries would replace Rosukrenojo with a joint company between Gazprom and Naftogaz. However, disagreements continued, with Russia claiming that Ukraine owed more money for that same year. Gazprom cut gas shipments to Ukraine by 50%. A new settlement was reached between the CEOs of both nations' gas industries. But then a wrench was thrown into the works when the Ukrainian cabinet refused to carry on with the agreement made by Yushchenko and Putin. The following year was known as the gas crisis of 2009. Which started from more disagreements on the price and supply of gas to Ukraine. By the end of 2008, Ukraine coughed up 90% of what Russia demanded, minus additional fees imposed by Gazprom. But the reduction in debt didn't soften Russia's demands for higher prices. In January of 2009, Russia cut off gas supplies once again. This time, Ukraine requested mediation by the European Union. And soon after, multiple countries, including the UK, reported that Russia was cutting supplies to them as well. A number of lawsuits were filed, and the loss in business caused Gazprom to lose almost as much as it had received from Ukraine's debt. It was starting to become clear that Russia was once again leveraging Gazprom's fuel potential to pressure the governments of NATO and EU nations. Finally, by 2010, Russian President Dmitry Medvedev and Ukrainian President Yanukovych signed an agreement to drop gas prices in Ukraine by 30%. In trade for the price drop, Ukraine would extend Russia's lease of the Black Sea Fleet, a naval base in Sevastopol. Ukrainian citizens protested the signage by throwing eggs and marches on the Ukrainian parliament that resulted in police intervention. These and many other controversies led to a revolution in Ukraine, which ousted President Viktor Yanukovych. The political climate of the island of Crimea became particularly fierce, which led to payment delays from oil and gas companies there, which owed money to Ukraine's Naftogaz. This led to a historic sanction by the EU against a Crimean gas company in 2014, which was the first time the EU specifically targeted a company. The Russo-Ukraine War and its impact on Russian oil and gas. Prior to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the US imposed more sanctions on Gazprom and other Russian oil and gas companies that were involved with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline in late 2019. The war in Ukraine has led to Germany cancelling the Nord Stream 2 pipeline in February 22, 2022, which was followed by US sanctions on the Gazprom subsidiary company Stream 2 AG and its CEO Matthias Warnig. These restrictions led to Stream 2 AG to file for bankruptcy, which was denied. Gazprom Bank is the third largest bank in Russia, and it has close ties to Gazprom. Following the annexation of Crimea, the United States imposed debt financing restrictions on the bank, and these sanctions also prevented any US companies or individuals from selling anything to Gazprom. Days later, in July 2014, the EU slapped more restrictions on Gazprom, and the EU followed up with restrictions on Gazprom Neft, the oil-producing branch of Gazprom. As war broke out in Ukraine, the country halted its own gas exports. Meanwhile, sanctions were imposed on Russia all around the world. In 2021, Russian oil exports were at an all-time high, but in 2022, the US banned all imports of gas, oil, and coal from Russia. Prior to the war, Russia was earning $900 million per day in gas exports to the European Union. However, that number has steadily fallen since the Ukraine invasion. The Russian inflation rate is expected to be around 21% for the year of 2022, which is below expectations set by the sanctions. The sanctions are also expected to reduce Russian GDP by only 11%. However, industry-leading technicians, engineers, and C-suite executives are leaving Russia in droves, creating a brain drain effect which won't be reflected in early reports on the economy. While the total economic effect on paper seems less impressive than anticipated, life for Russian citizens has been dramatically changed for the worse. Unemployment and inflation rates continue to rise, and some scholars have identified that these socio-economic conditions closely mirror the climate at the time when the Soviet Union collapsed. Russia closed its stock market, while banks doubled interest rates on loans as the value of the Russian currency, the ruble, fell to a fifth of its value just a few months prior to the war. In response to the sanctions, Russia demanded payment for all gas and oil exports be made in rubles, which would help boost the economy and raise the purchasing power for Russian citizens. But countries all around the world are under extreme pressure to avoid Russian imports or face severe political isolation. Economists are closely watching Russia's debt payments, since defaulting would not only collapse the gas and oil sectors, but it could also devastate Russia's whole economy as well. However, in part due to Russia's strong-arming negotiations with Ukraine over gas prices in the early 2000s, Russia has a large amount of cash and foreign currency on hand to pay its debts, for now. In March of 2022, the EU laid out one of the most sweeping blows to the Russian oil and gas industry thus far, with a full ban on Russian energy exports. However, these sanctions are a double-edged sword since gas prices in the EU have risen by over 800% as of 2021. At this point, the world seems to be in a war of attrition to see who can last the longest with these extreme sanctions disrupting the gas and oil supply chain and the broader global economy. It was easy to miss the growing tensions between Russia and Ukraine, and the role that gas and oil played in the deteriorating diplomatic relations between the two countries. Sanctions on Russia's natural gas and oil industry are costing the country billions, but the country is carrying on with their aggression in Ukraine in spite of the impact on Russian citizens and the Russian economy. It's a tragic tale that highlights the importance of diplomacy and the fragility of certain economic sectors. There's a ton of news reports about the war and its economic impacts. But did you learn anything new from this video? Let us know in the comments section and click the like and subscribe buttons to catch more geopolitical videos coming soon.